He walks into the room with a loud voice and a fragile ego. He seeks dominance, not connection, validation, not understanding. Beneath the bravado lies something far more delicate, an unresolved boyhood searching for a stage. The world tells him to be a man, to be strong, to command respect. But what if all of that is built on a foundation of fear, of something much deeper? What if the mask he wears is the very thing keeping him from true strength? This is not about man-hating or stereotyping. No, it's about understanding the invisible emotional wounds that many men carry into adulthood. These wounds aren't visible on the surface, but they're there, deep, layered, hidden beneath a controlled exterior. He wears his strength like armor, thinking it will shield him from the vulnerabilities of life. But in reality, that armor only serves to keep him locked inside a cage of his own making, unable to connect with anyone, including himself. What happens when masculinity is built not on maturity, but on insecurity? When anger replaces vulnerability and silence becomes the language of fear? You see, the immature masculine mind doesn't understand that true power doesn't come from domination, from controlling others or proving strength. Real power, as Carl Jung would say, comes from integration, when the masculine energy can reconcile with the feminine, when the conscious and unconscious can align. But in a world that pushes men to reject anything perceived as weak, this reconciliation is often lost, replaced by an endless chase for external validation. It's a tragic cycle, one that often plays out in the quietest of moments. The man who doesn't know how to express his pain, so he hides behind anger or deflection. The man who doesn't know how to be vulnerable, so he clings to control to make sure no one can get too close. Because deep down, that boy, that part of him still aching for approval, still afraid of rejection, is terrified of being seen for what he truly is, human. Jung would tell us that this immaturity is the result of the shadow, that unconscious part of the psyche that we refuse to acknowledge. In the case of immature masculinity, this shadow is often filled with the repressed emotions of childhood, fear, insecurity, helplessness, and it festers there, unacknowledged. A man may be strong in appearance, but when he hasn't integrated his shadow, he is constantly at war with himself. The external bravado is a smokescreen, a defense mechanism designed to protect him from the turmoil he feels on the inside. But in doing so, he remains cut off from his true potential. The warrior without purpose, the king without a throne. What he doesn't realize is that this quest for dominance, this perpetual game of power, only keeps him stuck in a loop of emptiness. The more he seeks to control, the more he distances himself from his true self. True masculinity is not about brute force, not about silence or stoicism. It's about the ability to understand, to reflect, and ultimately to act with a sense of purpose grounded in inner strength. The immature man can't do that because he hasn't learned to accept his own humanity, to reconcile his own contradictions. He is both the warrior and the vulnerable boy, but he doesn't yet understand how to make peace between them. This internal conflict manifests itself in ways both subtle and destructive. The outbursts of rage, the constant need to prove himself, the constant fear of being inadequate, they are all symptoms of a deep, unresolved wound, a wound that cannot be healed by power or pride, but only by honest self-reflection and growth. Jung's concept of individuation speaks to this journey of growth. It's about becoming whole, integrating the parts of ourselves that we've suppressed, and learning to embrace both our light and dark sides. For the immature man, the path to maturity is fraught with resistance. It's easier to play the role, to wear the mask, than to face the shadow within. It's easier to shout and demand respect than to show vulnerability and risk being judged. But it is in that very vulnerability where true strength lies. The ability to show fear, to admit mistakes, to be human. That is the mark of a mature masculinity. But first, one must be willing to face the uncomfortable truth that what the world has taught him about being a man is incomplete and often dangerously limiting. There is no strength in pretending to be something you are not. Real masculinity is about understanding yourself, confronting your fears, and ultimately embracing your vulnerability. When the immature man starts to let go of his need to control, when he begins to embrace the uncertainty of life instead of fighting it, that's when he begins to truly grow. That's when the boy within starts to heal. It's in this space that real connection is born, not in dominance or control, but in mutual respect, vulnerability, and understanding. For only when a man has made peace with his own inner boy can he move beyond the fragile ego and embrace the deeper, more fulfilling purpose of true masculinity. This is not a rejection of strength, but a redefinition of it. A strength grounded not in ego, but in authenticity, in the quiet power of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. If the immature man can begin to see this truth, he will stop seeking validation from others and instead start seeking it within himself. He will stop trying to dominate and instead begin to connect to himself and to others. This is not an easy journey. It requires courage, self-reflection, and a willingness to face the parts of himself that he has long avoided. But it is the only path to real maturity, to a masculinity that is whole, integrated, and truly powerful. And that is the kind of masculinity the world so desperately needs. As the immature man begins to realize the truth, that validation from the outside world is fleeting and true strength is an internal journey, he faces the daunting task of dismantling his own illusions. For so long, his identity has been tied to the performance of masculinity, to the external symbols of power and control. But now, confronted with the vulnerability he once feared, he must ask himself, who am I really without the mask? This is the moment of reckoning. The ego, long accustomed to playing the role of the invulnerable man, now faces the stark reality of its own fragility. It is here that the immature masculine psyche begins its true transformation, if it dares to take the first step. Carl Jung would tell us that this is the process of individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious parts of the self. The man must now begin to reconcile the boy within him with the adult he seeks to become. He must confront the shadow he has long denied. Jung argued that the shadow is not inherently evil or destructive. It simply represents the aspects of ourselves we choose to repress, the parts that we fear or deem unacceptable. For the immature man, the shadow is often filled with suppressed emotions: hurt, fear, vulnerability, inadequacy. These are the feelings he was taught to avoid, to suppress in order to appear strong. But what he doesn't realize is that by doing so, he has cut himself off from the very essence of his own humanity. In embracing the shadow, the immature man doesn't become weak. Quite the opposite. He becomes whole. To acknowledge the parts of ourselves that we've tried to hide, to bring those hidden fears and insecurities into the light, is to free ourselves from their control. The strength he seeks is not in denying his humanity, but in accepting it. This is the paradox of true masculinity. It is not in the rejection of vulnerability, but in the ability to embrace it. As he begins this journey of self-acceptance, the immature man will likely face resistance. The world is still full of messages that encourage him to remain stoic, to be unfeeling, to suppress any sign of weakness. These external pressures are powerful, and they reinforce the false idea that real men are immune to emotions. But the truth is, the man who has not faced his emotional depths is no more than a shell of what he could be. His actions are reactive, driven by unconscious fears and desires, rather than conscious choice and self-awareness. True masculinity, then, is not about being immune to emotions, but about being able to express and process them in a healthy way. It is about understanding that emotions are not weaknesses, they are signals. They tell us what is happening inside our minds, our bodies, our souls. A man who can listen to his emotions, who can recognize his fears and his desires without being ruled by them, has the capacity to lead, not through dominance or control, but through empathy, wisdom, and authentic connection. The journey toward maturity requires the courage to face one's deepest fears. It is about stepping into the unknown, confronting the parts of ourselves we've long avoided, and accepting that growth is uncomfortable. But it is in that discomfort where the real transformation happens. The boy who once feared rejection and shame begins to develop the self-assurance that comes with embracing his own imperfections. This self-assurance is not arrogance or superiority. It is rooted in an unshakable foundation of self-knowledge and acceptance. And it is this journey of self-knowledge that begins to redefine what it means to be a man. No longer does he measure his worth by the applause of others or the external markers of success. Instead, he begins to measure it by his ability to be authentic, to be compassionate, and to live in alignment with his deepest values. He no longer seeks dominance because he understands that true leadership comes from within. He no longer hides behind anger or control because he knows that vulnerability is the key to meaningful connection. This shift is not easy. It requires patience, self-reflection, and above all, a willingness to let go of the false narratives that have shaped his identity. But with each step toward authenticity, the immature man begins to shed the layers of defensiveness and insecurity that have held him back. He starts to see himself as more than just a collection of roles and expectations. He is a complex, multifaceted human being, capable of both strength and softness, of leadership and vulnerability. The process of individuation is ongoing. Even as a man matures, he will continue to face challenges, to confront new layers of his shadow, and to evolve. But this is what makes him truly alive, this continual process of growth, self-discovery, and integration. The man who has embraced his vulnerability becomes a leader not because of his power over others, but because of his ability to understand and connect with them on a deep, human level. Jung believed that the mature masculine archetype, the wise king, the protector, the creator, arises when the man has fully integrated his shadow, when he has reconciled his inner contradictions. The immature man may begin his journey as a warrior, aggressive, competitive, driven by the need to prove himself. But as he matures, he transforms. He moves beyond the limited view of masculinity as power over others, and embraces it as the power to lead with wisdom, to protect with compassion, and to create with integrity. This is the essence of true masculinity, not a rigid, one-dimensional role, but a dynamic, evolving process of becoming. The immature man is stuck in the past, clinging to outdated ideals and false notions of what it means to be a man. But the mature man is free. He is free to embrace his own complexity, to be both strong and vulnerable, both assertive and gentle. He is free to lead not through dominance, but through empathy, connection, and a deep sense of inner purpose. And this freedom, this liberation from the constraints of ego and societal expectation, is what allows the mature man to live authentically, to contribute meaningfully to the world, and to cultivate relationships that are grounded in mutual respect and understanding. It is through this journey that he becomes a man who can truly show up, not just for others, but for himself. In the end, it is not about being a man in the way society has defined it. It is about being a whole human being, one who has learned to embrace both the light and the dark within himself, to integrate his strengths and weaknesses, and to live with purpose and authenticity. This is the path of maturity. This is the path of true masculinity.